My name is Edgar Popper, and I am an electrician. Well, I guess I was an electrician back in the day. I'll back up a little bit. I wasn't exactly born an electrician. No, that happened slowly over time. But I digress. I was born in 1895 on the family homestead on Lower Market Street, across from Wappinger Creek and the Bleachery. My parents, John Popper and Alvaretta Brower Popper, had 6 children after I was born. All of them were girls. My mother's family is an old Wappinger family. They were here long before the village existed. And I am a descendant of the Brower family. You know, the same family that built the Measure homestead in the 1740s. Adolphus Brower and his son, Nicholas, bought all of the surrounding land from the Rombout patent holders, pretty much all of what we call the village of Wappingers today, Wappingers Falls today. My 5th great-grandfather was a brother to Adolphus. His name was Nazareth, so you could say I have very deep roots in Wappingers Falls. The village was just beginning to be electrified when I was a boy. The turn of the century was a very exciting time, especially when the village voted to build an electric power plant on Creek Road near my home. Why, when that power plant became operational, street lamps were installed on the village streets, and suddenly our nights were lit up. 10 years later, Garner Printworks built a new hydroelectric plant on the creek, giving the village electricity 24 hours a day. This part of the printworks was called the electrical department of the Garner Printworks and Bleachery. And who was employed there? Why, me, of course. That became the start of my career as an electrical contractor. By the mid-teens, electrical service expanded from the village. The surrounding hamlets of Hewsonville, Chelsea, Wheeler Hill, Stewartville, and the Reese Estate were all electrified. By the 1920s, Central Hudson began buying all the small power plants, and I lost my job at the electrical works. But not one to sit around for too long, I started my own electrical contracting company, whose office was in a building on East Main Street. It is actually the one that is occupied by the Knights of Columbus Lodge today. Alongside my business, Central Hudson and the New York Telephone Company had offices there too. My relationship with Central Hudson was symbiotic. They had wires to be strung, and my employees and I would string them to the poles. Once the wires were installed, I was able to take individual contracts with families and businesses that wanted their buildings wired for electricity. My business did very well. So well, in fact, that Popper Electric was in business for 47 years. Eventually, I moved across the bridge to a building on the creek. By then, I had about a half-dozen employees. On March 1973, I closed Popper Electric and began a well-earned retirement. But back to my earlier days, I met a young woman named Florence Marie Bate, who consented to marry me. I was 24 years old when Marie, as she was known, and I were married at the Presbyterian Manse. There was not one but 2 weddings held that day. Marie's sister, Laura, married Frederick Dusher alongside Marie and I. We were married by Reverend Edward Bate, Marie's father. Marie's mother, Janie, was also in attendance. By 1923, Marie's mother had passed away, and my father-in-law remarried a year later. After visiting his hometown in England, he married Thirza Winters, who you may remember from the gathering a few years back. My mother-in-law was a survivor, a brave survivor, when her ship was torpedoed in 1915 during World War I. Well, hello, Mother Big. I'll let Thriza speak for a little bit.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Let me introduce Sheffield, England. I was born in 1883 to a large family, one of 7 children. So of course I had to work at an early age. Some of my early occupations were that of a gilder and an etcher. By 1913, I was working in the United States for a Mrs. Steed, and so 1915, I was traveling home to Sheffield for a visit. Traveling aboard the Lusitania, when of course it was torpedoed by a German U-boat. I was on the top deck just after lunch when it happened. Everyone, of course, rushed up to try to be higher on the ship. It was the second torpedo that really made the impact of the explosion. So much destruction going on. I remember the great funnels of the ship were ablaze. It was an awful sight. Trying to stay alive and clinging to anything I could. I remember a piece of canvas that I clung to. I went under with the ship a couple of times, but that second time I was dragged into a rescue boat and I was saved. It seemed so strange. The day was so calm before. It was a beautiful day, and we were close to port. We could see land. And then the tragedy. I made a great many of acquaintances on that voyage, but afterwards, I only saw one of them. The rest were all drowned. In 1924, I married the Reverend Edgar Wellington Bate, and we served our faith community for many years. I enjoyed being settled by the age of 41 and having my own home, listening to Edward practice his sermons. And then he passed away in 1937. At that time, I made my home with my dear stepdaughter Florence, or Marie as she was called by her middle name, and welcomed by her husband Edgar as well to their family. Now, like me, Marie had no children of her own. We lived in a large house at 71 Zier Avenue, so we were able to take in a couple of lodges. I helped Marie with the cooking and the cleaning. By 1950, I was working as a nurse at the Gallaudet home in Poughkeepsie. I joined my Edward in 1958, and I'm buried just over here next to him. It's funny, after all those years, a book came out a couple of years before that, in 1956, called The Last Voyage of the Lusitania. Of course I have it. And one of the passengers, who I can't recall, his name was Donald Archie. Let me read what he says. Considered Miss T. Winter of New York to be one of the bravest women he had ever seen. I can't believe it. And it goes on to say that she was bleeding, gashes in her neck and her back, but she still managed to give artificial respiration to other passengers and managed to succeed in saving several lives. Now here's the part. Although he was sure he had walked across her bare feet a number of times, she did not once complain. It makes me smile to be remembered in that way. I'll leave you to it, Edgar. Good afternoon.
Rest well, Mother. Marie and I had a very happy, peaceful life. We lived at the home at Messier Avenue for over 20 years. I had nights out with the Lions Club in the Chamber of Commerce. Marie enjoyed her Octo group, a group of friends that played cards like 500 and bridge. In 1973, we built our dream home on Wheeler Hill Road. It was around that time that I began to write the history of the village, using my knowledge and connections newspaper clippings, photos, maps, and some of the data provided by Wappinger historian Clinton Clapp to write my book, The Birth and Growth of an Old Village. I donated the manuscript to the Historical Society in 1977, 3 years before my passing, and I am told it is still sold today in the Messier Homestead gift shop. Thank you all for your time. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.